Okay, it's 4 o'clock, so we will call this meeting of the Community and Protective Services Committee to order. And first, I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. And I'm not seeing any, so with that, I will state that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. We have a number of consent items, and I would ask committee to let me know if they want anything pulled. Sorry, committee. I'm going to backtrack there. I'm going to do a slight change of order first. So before we get to consent, we have a delegation item 4.3. So this is a delegation that's been previously granted, so we're not looking to vote on the delegation request itself. We will hear a delegation from the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. And Linda Steele, come on forward, go to the podium there, and you can address the committee. You have 5 minutes to do so. And then I believe Ms. Steele will be available to answer questions if the committee has questions.
Thank you. Thank you for granting the delegation request from the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. And I would like to note Marnie Sherrod is here, another committee member, just for support. The members around the CSCP table, whether voting or non-voting members, at large or representative members, are passionate about and committed to the mandate and responsibilities outlined in our terms of reference. We're proud of the work we have done. Our chair, Lynn Norman, and various other committee members provided me with a short list of some of the actions and initiatives that originated with CSCP, were initiated by CSCP and passed other agencies to deliver, or were promoted, recommended, and supported by CSCP. This list is far from complete and is included in my written submission. There are 31 items on the list. How were we able to accomplish these items? Because of the current composition of members on the committee. 2019 Community Safety Week took place from May 5th to May 11th. We had 27 community partner organizations contribute to the week and 59 individuals from these organizations showcasing, sharing, and promoting safety information, resources, and services available within the City of London. No other committee, advisory committee, does this type of work, and I think we did the city proud. How were we able to bring together that many people and organizations? Because of the current composition of members on the committee. It is my understanding you've been provided with the CSCP terms of reference. I am here today on behalf of the committee to request that you do not change the composition of the members as per our terms of reference for the next 2 years. Our committee is somewhat unique. We have a collaborative mix of members at large, representative voting members, and non-voting members. Everyone is an equal at the table. There are no personal agendas or group agendas. We each and all share concerns, trends, and issues we are seeing and dealing with or are worried about. Then as a group, we discuss what to do next, whether it be ask for more information or then discuss a possible solution or make a recommendation to council. Our members at large contribute their concerns and the representative members discuss how we can help. And our members at large give the representative members invaluable feedback on issues they raise as a concern. It is a wonderful collaborative balance and it has worked very well. Demographically, we encompass every demographic within the City of London. If the city moves to members at large only, you will be narrowing, not broadening, community representation. It will be gone. You will be losing the school boards, the parent groups, the youth, the seniors, the health groups, the safety groups, the neighborhood groups, the resource groups. You will be losing all the partners around the table. It's most unfortunate that our committee agendas and minutes no longer capture the direction, discussions, or decisions made. They only report the specific recommendations to council. So our city council and the public have no meaningful information on what issues we've discussed, why, or what resulted. A recent example of this is the Active and Safe Routes to School program. Not only have we been promoting the program, we've been discussing how to engage seniors in the community to facilitate walking school buses, where any liabilities might lie, the involvement in student transportation services, safety audits around schools to ensure safe travelways, maintenance of the travelways, local public input on safe travel plans, engaging parents to encourage walking, wheeling, and biking to school, and to reduce traffic in school zones. We ran the Active and Safe Routes to School contest in the elementary schools in both boards, which resulted in 28 very happy young winners. The video and poster submissions will be used to raise awareness and further promote healthy active travel in London. I must ask, what do you want from the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee, and what is in the best interests of the community and the city? Please read our mandate and responsibilities. We believe they cannot be met or accomplished by members at large only. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Steele. Any questions of Ms. Steele from committee members or visiting counselors? Counselor Squire.
Can I just understand, I think I know what you're saying, but are you saying you just want it to be kept with the present makeup of committee members at large and appointed people? You're not saying the specific people, are you? That you want the same people?
No, thank you, Councillor Squire. We're not saying keep exactly the same people, but the same composition, that you would have the appointed representatives, which of course have to be still approved by council.
Committee members?
I have my written submission. Who do I give that to? Thank you.
So, committee, I'm not sure if you recall, we are undergoing a process right now where we're reviewing all of the advisory committees, how we're doing it, the makeup, the terms of reference, all those things. And so what's happening right now is we're going to straight members at large. So just any member of the general public for any of the advisory committees can apply and would serve a 2-year term on the advisory committees while this review is ongoing. And so what Ms. Steele is saying is their committee has specific representation from specific organizations, including the 2 school boards. I do also understand, unlike members at large, when a specific representative, say from Middlesex London Health Unit, can't make that a particular meeting, they can send an alternate. So with members at large, that sort of thing is not possible. And so that's why we often see committee reports from other advisory committees where quorum hasn't been met, and so the meeting didn't take place. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this advisory committee for all the work they do. Point of clarification and a question through you to our presenter today, if I may. In your opinion, if we put this on hold, go back to just the normal members as we appoint, do you feel we'd lose all those people as they waited for the review process? If it might take a year or 2, that they'd find other things to do and we'd lose that talent inside of the table?
Yes, I do. I figure you would lose that. It would be hard to get everybody back. We move on to other things.
So I have a question. How many current members of the advisory committee have applied to be members at large?
To the best of my knowledge, and I did send out an email prior to this meeting to all of the members, no one has reapplied. The only one that has reapplied from the committee as a member at large is Bruce Rankin, and he currently sits as a member at large, but any of the representatives have not reapplied, and their boards did not give them permission to reapply.
So a representative from, say, the 2 boards, from the health unit, from other organizations, how does their name currently come forward under the old system?
Under our current terms of representation or terms of reference. In the old system, from the school boards, our board chair would appoint someone to an outside committee, and it works the way with the school councils and home and school association. And the board of directors from Neighborhood Watch and Active and Safe Routes to School, their steering committee, Middlesex London Safety, also their board of directors, and then it would go to council for approval.
So I think it sounds to me like it's a little bit different from other advisory committees where there is representation from different sectors on other advisory committees, but it feels like the organizations themselves appoint someone and send them to this advisory committee. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if you'll allow a technical question through you to staff, I wonder if perhaps Ms. Westlake Power could answer this for us. And I haven't asked her this prior, so she may not have the numbers off the top of her head, but do other committees have spots reserved for organizational appointments similar to this one, or is this one the only one that has spots reserved for organizations like the school boards?
Through the chair, the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee is the only one that has voting membership from the school boards, but there are representatives from the school boards as non-voting resource members on many of the other committees. And there are a variety of appointments on other advisory committees that are from specific organizations. There's also some that are, as has been previously noted, from sectors, because we were having difficulty getting from specific organizations, so they broadened it a bit. But there are specific ones on other committees as well.
So committee, what the delegation has requested is that this is a matter that's been voted on at council, the restructuring of the advisory committees. They're asking for us to recommend to council that there be reconsideration of that decision for this advisory committee and during the review process to leave their makeup as it is. Councillor Sully.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just procedurally wise, I don't know if we can do that right here at this point. I'm not sure because it's already decided, and then I guess it usually requires 2/3 majority if I'm not.
So that's correct, and that's why the delegation and in the report from the advisory committee, they're asking us specifically to, as a committee, to ask council to reconsider that vote for this particular advisory committee. So another thing to consider is that we could refer this item to the next SPPC meeting, which is June 7th, June 4th. And in either case, whether we make a recommendation from this committee or defer it to SPPC, either way, it doesn't go to council till June 11th. The next council meeting is June 11th. So whether the decision, whether there is a recommendation from this committee or whether it is discussed at SPPC with committee of the whole, it won't go before council till June 11th. Well, Councillor Sully still has the floor, and then Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the clarification. So I would probably be more so inclined to refer to SPPC. I think just in case if there's a broader context, this is one committee, but there might be other committees that share that, and I would rather have the committee of a whole being able to participate in the conversation. I recognize that they came to this committee because they report to this committee, but I think it probably would have made more sense to be Corporate Services or SPPC. But again, I'm not a clerk, but that'd be my suggestion. So I'll just look if there's support around the horseshoe for that.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am actually going to follow up on Councillor Sally's questions procedurally. We could also refer this to council for consideration without a recommendation, correct? And the reason I ask is, sorry, I'll just sort of expand on why this question is coming up. I'm really concerned about us setting precedent to refer things that we don't want to decide at a particular committee to SPPC. I certainly understand why on the BRT discussion we did that, but
I'll explain it. I'm sorry, I didn't explain it very well. There is a report coming from staff to the next SPPC meeting about the whole advisory committee review. The striking committee that is choosing the new members at large on all the advisory committees, they are reporting to that June 4th SPPC meeting. So it may be appropriate to deal with this issue at that meeting. This is committee's decision. Committee can take no action, committee can receive, committee can make a recommendation to council, committee can defer it to SPPC. It's completely in committee's hands. Councillor Lewis, do you have more?
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, Madam Chair. I would rather the colleagues that we deal with this. I'm really concerned that we are starting to set a precedent in this term of council that our standing committees are referring tough decisions to SPPC rather than making a recommendation and forwarding them to council. We've seen that on 2 other issues already, and if we're going to continue to do that, I just don't see why we have standing committees. We may as well dissolve them and do everything at SPPC. So I think that we should make a decision on this and forward it to council for consideration.
Councillor Salih?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to cross debate or anything, but just to clarify my intent of the motion, I don't feel like this should have come to this committee. I understand why it came to this committee, but I feel like the decision is a SPPC matter, or if not, a corporate services matter, because it talks about the governance piece versus the report or the pieces that need to be done. And recognizing June 4th is a special meeting where we're exactly talking about these topics, and it just seems like it makes sense. I recognize the BRT and the other items might be different, but that's the only reason why I'm referring to here, because I don't feel like it should be at the Community Protective Services Committee, especially on something that's already a decided matter of council.
Councillor Squire?
I had a question and then a comment. I wanted to ask, one of the things the presenter said was that nobody's reapplied for the committee, and the presenter also said that some of the organizations wouldn't let their employees or whatever reapply. What does he mean by that? Or why wouldn't a school board say, well, apply to go back on the Community and Protective Services Committee? Why would they tell someone not to do that? Do you know, if you know, no speculation, but if you know, I'd be interested.
Thank you, through you, Chair. We discussed it at our board meeting, our Board of Trustees meeting for London District Catholic School Board, and my understanding is that a similar discussion took place at Thames Valley District School Board. And in terms of our board recognizing that as a position, if I was a member at large, they would no longer recognize that. So hopefully that explains it a little better. Oh, sorry.
I still don't understand. So you're saying if someone from the London District Catholic School Board says, I'd like to be on the Community and Protective Services Committee, there's a difference between saying we won't recognize it, although I don't know what that means, but there's a difference between that and saying we won't allow you to be on the Community and Protective Services Committee.
Thank you. Maybe I misspoke by using the word allow then, but I would not be in a position to bring back any information to the board as a member at large in what took place at the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. And I do report back on that at our board meetings. And I wouldn't be able to bring the school board in with many of the initiatives that we've undertaken because I would not be sitting there as a member of the school board. I would be sitting there as a member at large. So that connection and partnership would be gone.
So I just want to comment on I agree with Councillor Salih, and I understand this is a larger issue of what advisory committees are going to look like, and it's beyond the scope of one committee. So if this committee today says, well, for this particular committee, we're going to continue it on as members at large and appointed members, that's sort of going to tie the hands of us moving forward with the review process as to what we do with other committees. Because surely if one committee is allowed to do that, why wouldn't we do it for other committees? So I think we'd almost be pre-deciding something. And the other thing I have to say, I'm really surprised that a school board would take the position that although a person from the school board is sitting on one of our committees, they can't go back and tell the board what happened at the committee. There's no legal reason they couldn't do that. And it just seems to me, and I don't want to be, is it some kind of protest? Like if you won't let us be appointed members, we're not going to report back. I find that a little concerning. So I think this is a matter that I'd like to weigh in, certainly as a councillor. on what advisory committees are going to look like. And to do it with one committee and not with all of them is a little concerning.
Counselor Hillier.
I'd like to make a motion to refer this to SPPC and see where it goes.
So I have Counselor Sully as making that motion, and I will definitely put you on as his second. Counselor Hillier? Any other comments or questions from committee or other visiting council members? I'm not seeing any. So we have a motion on the floor to refer this to the June 4th SPPC meeting. And I will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
So thank you, Ms. Steele. This will be discussed amongst the entire council at Committee of the Whole on June 4th. What committee must do now is receive the report from the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. Can I have a mover? Councilor Pelosi has moved it and Councilor Lewis is seconding, and I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Now I will go back to the consent items. We have item 2.1 through 2.8. Would committee like to pull any of those consent items or visiting members? Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I've pulled item 2.2.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2.4, please.
With that, I'm looking for a motion for the remainder of the consent items. Moved by Pelosi, seconded by Hillier. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Item 2.2, Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wording for this has already been submitted to committee ahead of time, as well as the clerk. Just regarding the wording put out in item 2.2 being the London Housing Advisory Committee minutes, moving that the balanced report be received outside of item 2.1 and that report be referred to civic administration to review the concerns set out in the presentation, report back to this committee with the responses. And it being noted that the municipal council, although respectful of the concerns raised in the presentation, the accusatory language contained within the presentation is defamatory and not appropriate.
So Councillor Pelosi did send an email to everybody about that. I'm sure everyone had a chance to read it. Any comments or questions? We don't need a seconder. We're at committee, but we could have one if somebody wants. Councillor Hillier is seconding Councillor Pelosi's motion. Do you have any comments? So in a second, the motion will be up on the screen if you would like to review it before we vote. So I'm just wondering about the language in Part A, and if that is the language that the mover and seconder would like to move forward with, or is there any possibility of softening it at all? Just a question from the chair. If you click on 2.2 on your agenda on the screen, the motion will come up on the right. Any comments, questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly support the direction my colleagues are taking on this item. And I'm just reading the language again, and I will share with everyone that I'm a little bit concerned about the language that reads, contained in the presentation is defamatory. I think the rest of the motion is quite appropriate. I'm just concerned about us making motions that sort of render legal judgment on language used. So I will, defer to my colleagues. It's their motion as to whether or not they would see that as appropriate. I think that it is fair to say that we are respectful of the concerns, and I think it's even fair to say that there's some language in there that does come across as somewhat accusatory. I understand that's from the passion of the individuals involved in reporting that, but my concern is the specifics of defamatory in there.
Councillor Squire.
First of all, defamation is a legal concept, and a lot of cases go to trial in front of a jury with a judge to determine if in fact something is defamatory. I don't know who came up with this phrasing, but in my view, we should not be using that phrasing in anything we do. Telling someone something they've done is defamatory in itself may be defamatory. You're suggesting that somebody has said something. First of all, it has to be false, and then it has to have a certain effect on opinion. So I'm really concerned about that. And, I read social media every now and again, and I can tell you that I'm defamed, and most counselors are defamed just about every day. And I don't ever think about suing because I understand people get passionate. I understand people are really have strong beliefs, and I accept that as a politician. And I won't be supporting this at council, this kind of language. If we can't accept that we're going to have to get some heat as politicians, we need to find another job.
Councillor Sally.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just remember what Squire said when I tweet him later today. I never want to be in a position where I'm telling my council colleagues what to say or what to write. They're free to do because they're independent on their own, but I see where Squire's coming from. To move us forward to a point of decision, maybe if it's helpful if we just separate the one language part and just let the committee decide and go from there, just to clean it up.
Councillor Sully, thank you very much. And I was actually going to ask the mover and seconder to start with it being noted, make that a B and the receive part being a C, because I also will not be voting in favor of that part. Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly this motion did come through the clerk's office as well. If defamatory is a legal term that could have legal liability ramifications later, Councillor Hillier and I would be, as a mover and a seconder, would be fine to remove said word and just leave it as it's not appropriate. If that would be acceptable to Councillor Sally's concern.
Again, it's not for necessarily my comfort. I just think like even maybe perhaps the non-appropriate part. I mean, I don't want to debate members of the public in a motion. Like I would just go and do that to the news if I wanted to do that myself. But again, I understand this particular case. So I think where it just ends at raised in the presentation period, and then if you want to separate whatever, because I don't want to tell a council colleague what to share or not share.
So again, even without the defamatory word, I would prefer it being noted, that whole sentence, it being noted, to be separated out personally. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Just briefly, I don't think any of that language is necessary in the motion. I think the presentation is very focused on the policies that we have, the actions that have been taken, the results that have been delivered or not. And I think on an issue like housing, this is a very important issue. Yeah. And I would say that our results on housing have been mixed. Some things have been going well and some things have not been going well. And it's a difficult area where I think there's a strong common commitment to do better. And so I think if we're going to do better, we have to be open to being criticized. I think it's really us as a council, ultimately that's where the responsibility rests, right? And so I do think, when we're trying to assign responsibility, I think I would encourage members of the public to assign it to councilors, and rather than, individual staff members or people who are working in the area, because really the decisions are made ultimately by us. And I think we have to accept the responsibility. And so, I think the actual report that has come along with the presentation is very detailed. It's really focused on how we can do better. And I think we need to have that conversation. So I don't think that particular language is helpful in actually moving us forward and trying to do better. So I would suggest you don't do it. I do think we need to work together in a kind of spirit of cooperation though, because it's going to take everybody working together to actually do better.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mover?
You can certainly separate out into a C.
So we'll separate it being noted into, why don't we make that a B and make receive C, just to keep it clean? And is the word defamatory staying in the new part B? And we are removing the word defamatory from the new part B. I'll call all three items separately too. Any other comments, questions? So we'll put A up, and that should be unchanged from item 2.1 all the way to report back to Community and Protective Services Committee with responses. That will be part A. Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, question your staff. Just if we assign them this task, when might they be able to report back?
Ms. Datersbeer.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. As council knows, we're in the midst of doing our homeless prevention and housing plans, and we're expecting to have that back to you. We also have a report coming to you later in June on the work that's being done in that regard, so we can certainly try to include it in that, and if not, it would be the meeting thereafter.
Thank you. So A's ready. We can call the vote on part A.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So part B is next, which starts from it being noted and all the way through to the language contained in the presentation is, we need to, and there's an extra and in there that we can take out, but you can clean that up later, is not appropriate. And I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion fails 2-3.
And part C is receive the report. And if there are no other comments, I will call that vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So that was for the fourth report of the Housing Advisory Committee. We also have the fifth report. If I can have a mover to receive that report. Moved by Councillor Salih, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And we're opening the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
That brings us to item 2.4, London Strengthening Neighborhood Strategy, Neighborhood Decision-Making Program. I wanted to point out to committee that there was an error on the original report, and so there is an amendment page. It's in the added agenda. And Councillor Lewis, you had a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of comments and questions to staff as well. First, I want to say, as a private citizen, I've participated in neighborhood decision-making over the last 2 years. I think it's a wonderful program. I think that people get excited about seeing their proposals get on the ballot to be voted on. And I know that seeing some of them come to fruition in their neighborhoods really does give a feeling of empowerment to people. So I'm very happy to see that the feedback from respondents that was in the report here is very positive as well. So that's all well and good. In terms of a comment through you to staff, I would respectfully hope that perhaps we might focus group test some of our materials, particularly our signage, our lawn signs that went out for these events. Everyone around this horseshoe has put out signs for campaigning purposes, and we all know how important it is for them to be crisp and clear. And I found the signs very busy and hard to attract attention. The lettering was small and hard to read. They were great in certain locations, but in some of our locations in front of our arenas and community centers, they were hard to see. So just a bit of feedback on that. I do have a couple of questions through you to staff. A number of these projects have been installed on school and church properties, and I don't dispute that the projects themselves have value to the community and that these organizations are well intended, but they don't really reflect true public space. Although I am the first to say schoolyards often function as de facto neighborhood parks after school hours, during the summer, at other times during the calendar. But with a real need for funding in public parks and recreation facilities and other recreational opportunities in the community, has consideration been given to requiring some sort of matching financial contribution from a school or church if the project is not on city land?
Through the chair, specifically to that question, no. We haven't considered a matching aspect to the program. I would say that the reason that we've tried to leave the definition of public as broad as possible, it's the accessible part that matters, is we're trying to remove all barriers to what, or as many as we can, to what a neighborhood might like to see happen. And in some neighborhoods, there are not city-owned lands that a project could be done on. So we're trying to make it as open as possible, which is why the definition is very broad for this particular program. But to your specific question, no, we have not considered a matching element, again, in the spirit of trying to not have barriers to an idea being able to move forward.
Okay, so you actually kind of answered my second question in that, which was whether or not consideration has been given to restricting projects to city-owned spaces specifically, and hearing that those aren't always available in some neighborhoods, I understand where that restriction might be seen as a barrier actually to neighborhoods participating. So I thank you for that. I guess my final question to you, and this one is just sort of expanding out of the answer to that question, and I hadn't given this much thought before, but we do know that neighborhoods with various inequalities exist across the city, and it can make it hard for those neighborhoods with some inequalities to compete. So, for example, if a school community rallies around a playground improvement, it's very easy for them to stuff the ballot box in their favor and leave a community without perhaps the organizing skills to have as much chance of success. So do we have any mechanisms in place in our vetting procedures that would perhaps say to a particular block, well, your school was awarded a project last year, so you are not eligible to apply for a second one this year? Are there restrictions like that that make sure we're having some opportunity to spread the wealth around?
Through the chair, you'll see in the report that that kind of idea is not in our recommended changes. What is, though, in an effort to try and recognize and address that exact concern about some areas that may not be as organized or as much opportunity, that at a staff level, we have a much stronger outreach strategy and other supports in place to try and support, even within the larger districts, areas that might not be thinking about this or ready to organize around an idea. So we're prepared to undertake a number of different strategies to improve that, including identifying champions and those kinds of things. So we understand the concern, and that's one of the ways that we're trying to address potential inequities between within the 5 areas.
Thank you. I'll just wrap up very quickly then and give my other colleagues an opportunity to speak. I want to thank publicly all the volunteers who have been part of the neighborhood decision-making program over the last 2 years. I know that they've played an important role, particularly on election day when they're sitting in the libraries and staffing those voting stations for us, and all the people that have, used social media, Facebook and Twitter to get the message out there and encourage participation on voting day. I think that's really important. My only comment is I would still be more comfortable with a recommendation that said a specific address location would not be eligible in the following calendar year if they're awarded a project. But I'm gonna yield the floor to my colleagues and see what other people think before we can entertain anything of that regard.
I have Councillor Sali, and then Pelosa, and then Squire.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lewis, for bringing that up, because that's what I was going to discuss, because I've heard the feedback in the past, and I've had the opportunity to speak with staff, and I look closely at the recommendations for the implementation for 2019, and I appreciate that there are going to be some outreach, but I don't think it will address the concern. So I think, if I'll look to staff, if I think we need to either have staff possibly come back with what they could do to address it, whether it's you can't do it more than, reapply after 1 year or 2 years, or if there's another mechanism, because I think my fear is that if you just have a neighborhood that's very active, you're just going to have more and more money going to that one specific neighborhood. And then there's an inequality in other neighborhoods, which I've heard, and people are frustrated because they can't get the numbers out, whether it's because some people live in apartment buildings or whether just their parents are busy working. And just, so there's quite a few barriers there. And I've personally met with some of those kids who voted and worked really hard in different communities, and it's a good life lesson for reality of how democracy will work, but also at the same time, it kind of deflated some of them. So I'm hoping that, I guess the staff, is there some sort of direction I can give you today that you can come back and maybe kind of reflect on what specific kind of things we could do? Because I don't want it to go for 2019 where it's the same people getting the same money again, or whether we split up the money, or whether we break down the regions more so that other regions get it, because I think it seems to be northeast, but in particular area northeast where it comes. But I know Beacock area, they've tried very actively to try to succeed, and they haven't been successful in other parts of town. So through the chair to staff.
Through the chair, I would just note that our recommendations were based on the responses we got through the survey. So we asked very specifically the kinds of suggestions that you're raising, and did not see a response that suggested we needed to make significant change to the structure of the program. And so we were trying to address the concerns around our process pieces. Of course, if council wishes to make a change, we would do whatever council wishes. I would also just note, though, that it has only run twice. We've only had 2 rounds of experience. These are very early evaluation or survey results. And so our recommendation at this point is let us undertake the process changes that we're making, see what happens in the 3rd round. And if at that point, and again, we'll be evaluating it with feedback from those that participated, we would then come back with further changes if we're continuing to see a trend. At this point, we've only had 2 cycles. That's the staff response. If council wishes a different direction, please, we're fine to return with a different model. I will also, and I'll finish up. I will also say that many of those things were discussed when we brought to council the original structure of the program. We had different geographic split up, which also divides your money up to smaller amounts. So there's good and bad on all sides of it.
So I'll say that I still think, I recognize the outreach strategy will help, but I don't think that will address the concern that I think me and Councilor Lewis are speaking of, because the people I'm referring to were aware of the opportunity, tried to succeed, but couldn't compete essentially with the Goliath other neighborhoods. And that's just gonna happen again. I'm almost confident one particular neighborhood that I represent will probably win because they come out and vote quite heavily for Mo. I know that because I've seen the stats. So, and it's a very active community. So I think, sorry, one sec. So I think I'll look to Councilor Lewis because I think he has a motion and I'll probably second it. So let me just be quiet for now.
Councilor Pelosi.
Sorry, the note passing was from Councilor Lewis for clarity. Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. Certainly, I recognize Councilor Morgan. This was one of his passions, and I've discussed my concerns with him as well. And certainly, I was a Southwest London volunteer for the last 2 years since the inaugural start of the program. I submitted my ideas, I helped other community members submit theirs, and now in the position I'm in, I've gone back and read the June 2017 report that outlined our different ideas, how we might do it, how to try and have fair allocations of money, and certainly certain areas of London are very affluent and or engaged or organized, educated, and they just have time to be engaged. So my concern with the process is, as we're saying, our feedback is showing these aren't concerns. The only feedback I'm afraid you're getting are for those people who already are engaged. And the people who aren't submitting ideas, who aren't out voting, are the ones that we're still not engaging. For the Southwest area, White Oaks Park had one idea that received money out of lots of applications, and all the rest of the money has always gone to the Byron area. It just shows the strength of certain communities when you have that community hub that's a library, people are engaged, the schools are engaged. Last year, we had a school in the North End that was very well organized and had money, from my understanding of the media reports, who received one of the grants to redo their schoolyard while the school next to it was a dilapidated schoolyard from the photos I saw online. And it just, those kids were sad. I have sad community members who are now saying, as I try and get to the school kids, saying, it's coming again, we can maybe do a winter carnival, whatever your ideas are, and they're like, we never get picked. I don't even care this year. Recognizing this was a 3-year program, ideally, before it came back for a full review. I recognize that schoolyards right now are allowable spaces, but also sharing the concerns that it adds to the have and the have-nots, those who can be well organized and have the money, and that we're picking up slack that I don't believe municipality was to pick up and making up for what parent counselors aren't able to provide, what the school boards aren't able to provide, and our provincial government. So I'm just raising those concerns and looking forward to whatever this motion may be of a way to move forward to make sure that we do stick to the original intention of this program of making residents feel engaged and powerful and that they have a say in their local neighborhoods. And maybe it would be a clause that if you have no city property, that you could use a school in those cases if that's the only community space available in your neighborhoods.
Counselor Squire.
When we initially started this program, I was very supportive of the idea, but I voted against it because I didn't like the process, and I still don't like the process. And I'm a big fan of Ninja Warriors, but you know, the idea that in the Northwest region, the entire $50,000 available is going to one project just doesn't feel right to me. To say, because I've been involved in this process on the day of, been where I've seen people voting and I know how disappointed they are. And quite frankly, I know they're not going to be successful. They just don't have the numbers compared to another area. So I think we really should be looking at changing this either. And it's not very difficult to say, well, each project would get a maximum of this amount of money. Both years that I've been involved, big projects have taken the vast majority of the money through a well-organized campaign, and all of the little projects have fallen by the wayside. And that's hard for me when I know the other areas would really benefit from this. So I'm with what the other councillors have said, and I think it is really important that we look at this. The other thing is surveys are surveys. I mean, the numbers aren't huge. I have no idea who's voting. I think we need to go on beyond that and think about just the basic concept of fairness.
So I'm going to go to Deputy Mayor Helmer, but before I do that, I'm going to go to staff, if you can give us some idea on the survey itself and what the response was to the survey. Was it broad? Because there have been a number of comments made about the survey that I think have just been supposition, and I personally would like to know about the survey itself. Ms. Livingston.
The survey, if you go to your appendix on page 423, you can see the number of responses that we had and how we engaged on the survey. It was an exit survey for people that were voting, and so there is probably some validity to the point that if you didn't come out to vote, your opinion was not sought, but that is what it was. We did try to ask the exact questions that are being discussed today, and then the numbers are listed there. In terms of 2017, we had almost 2,700, and that included online, and then because of a change in the way Neighborhood Get Involved survey worked in 2018, then they didn't ask for it automatically, so the number is slightly lower to 518. It is what it is. These are early survey results. This is not a full-on evaluation. And so we're trying to share with you the results, the questions that were asked, and what information we got back. We're entirely in your hands. If you wish to make changes to the program, we would need to know that sooner than later in order to run an effective program that also includes some of the improvements we would like to undertake around outreach. I would just like to draw committee's attention to the appendices that were corrected. For the report in your added agenda, we do have large and small projects. There are projects that were $1,000, $600. They were not, in fact, there are more of those than the very big numbers. So I just would like to say that there's a range of ideas that were supported, not just big number ideas.
Thank you, Ms. Livingston. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Just a couple of things. First, I think this is a tricky thing to design, right? I think it's a good idea in concept, and then it's difficult to design it. And we knew when we put these regions in place, when we started the program, that there's a bit of a trade-off involved. This is a bit easier to administer, right? There's only 5 regions. You can put more staff effort into supporting 5 regions than you can 14, for example. Like, that's just a lot more things happening at the same time. And especially when we were getting it started, I think that this was the right way to start. But because there's no cap for any individual project, you only have 5 regions, and then you have $50,000 maximum, and one project can take all of the money if it's a really good project and it's really popular, and we've seen that happen. If you look at the numbers so far, most of the projects are $15,000 or less. There's a couple that seem to be at $17,700, which is some magic number. If you went to $17,700, almost everything is below that. There's just a few that are above. And I think that's the issue. When you get the combination of one geography that is doing very well and constantly proposes big projects, that's where you're getting, the other areas are getting zero, right? And so that's where we get into this issue around fairness. And specifically in my ward, the south end of the ward is doing very well under this program. Lots of cool things are happening and it's working great from their perspective. The north end of my ward is not working great. Nobody is getting anything funded and they don't like this program. And they're gonna disengage from it because it's not working for them, right? So, I think that's where we have to deal with the realities of, there are lots of projects that could happen in a place like Booley, for example, and they're not gonna win if we keep the program this way. It's just not gonna happen. Cedar Hall is gonna keep taking home all the big prizes. And I think we have to think about that, and we don't need to go to 14, I don't think that's necessary. I think it's the combination of the small number of regions and being able to take the full amount that is creating this issue. So if we put in a cap of 15 or 17,700, that would mean that in most places, there's gonna be 3 or more projects funded in each of these regions. And I think that naturally will just spread it out more. Maybe it will mean that, the same northeast corner is getting all the same things. They just get 3 $15,000 projects instead of one $50,000 one, but I don't think so. I think it will kind of start to even out. And if we need to start dividing some other regions to make them smaller, I think we need to start doing that. We don't need to go from 5 to 14. We could go from 5 to 6. And when I was reading over the report, I said, I'd just like to pull out the area from the river down to the train tracks. So like Kipps Lane, Huron, all that whole section, just take it out, take out the per capita money from the Northeast region and just have them have their own region. And people can put forward project ideas and it won't be $50,000 maximum. It'll be like, I don't know, 25,000 or something like whatever the per capita number would be. And I think that would resolve the geographic fairness issue, right? At least in that part of the city. I don't know how bad it is in other parts of the city because honestly, I'm not looking at what's going on in those areas. Like Councillor Pelosi talked about, Byron is getting a lot of the Southwest. But I do know what's been going on in the central part. So, I think it's been a good program overall. A lot of cool projects have been funded. And I think that's part of why people are reacting the way they are. They want to be included. They want to see some of these cool things happen in their neighborhoods. And I do think it's going to be incumbent on us to kind of address this issue around the fairness without creating like a huge amount of work and changing everything, because I think a lot of the elements of it are good. So I would say 2 things. One is put a cap in maybe about the amount, just to bring down the maximum and to ensure there'll be more than one project in a region. And then maybe consider adding 1 or 2 regions maybe, just to address the areas that have been just totally shut out in the first couple of years. I think that would be reasonable.
I also want to note that I don't see many winning ideas in Ward 5. So it's not just affluent neighborhoods that are getting the money. It's a combination of being engaged. And I personally haven't heard complaints from anybody in Ward 5. I've actually heard different neighborhoods gone on a school walkabout doing a safety audit and them pointing to what's going on with the ninja drop zone by Marguerite de Youville School and saying, wow, we should do something like that. So actually, people in my ward are starting to hear more about this and are starting to want to become engaged. It's 2 years old. So before I go to you, Councillor Lewis, just something that other councillors have brought up about same geographical areas winning in subsequent years. It's 2 years old, so that could only have happened once so far. I'm just looking to staff. Has that happened where the same area, and how many times across the 5 zones has the same area been the winning idea?
Through the chair, the Cedar Hollow area has won back-to-back. And if you then go to neighborhood, there are some in Byron, not the same exact area or the same group, but it is the same geographic area. I think that's it.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it might just be that Ward 5's councillor has done such a great job that they don't need anything else, that everything's there for them already.
Kiss up to the chair. Teacher's pet.
Just to preface this, I do have a motion to put forward, and I will say, I'm looking forward to the naturalized playground that's going to go in Kiwanis Park, and I don't begrudge the outdoor skating rink that Councillor Hillier is going to get in Carroll Park. We overlap on the geographic map, and I think that has been spread out well. I'm reluctant to go further with caps and things like that, because I think if one area gets a really big project, a $30,000, $36,000 one year, it can inspire other neighborhoods to put in one the next year. But I think the most important thing, and it comes back to my question about churches and schools, and school communities in particular can be really well organized. And I think about our council policy of not filling the gaps left by the provincial and federal government. And I think that we also have to be mindful that we cannot fill every gap left by the school boards either. So I would like to, and keep in mind as well that we can revisit this in future years as we get more data over the years. And I'm really concerned as well that very few exit surveys were conducted by young people who participated. The demographics definitely skewed older on the exit surveys, but I think that the best addition we can recommend right now is that, and this will be the motion, that civic administration be requested to report back to a future CPSC meeting regarding making locations ineligible for funding in consecutive years in the neighborhood decision-making program. And I think that that's a simple approach to tweaking it now and seeing what the results are later.
Councillor Sally.
I'm supportive of seconding that if the councillor is okay with including the portion that I mentioned and Deputy Mayor Howard mentioned as well, and I think a few others, which is the geographic area, for them to just look at that and what maybe tweaks they could do when they come back. I think that was an important part, because I think the geography might have been the barrier as well. And I think if they're just reporting back, I think it's fair to look at, you know, at a high level, just the caps on funding, if we need to spread it as well, if we're going to add more regions.
So the report back would be what Councillor Lewis said, then adding that staff also consider splitting up some of the regions so that there are more than 5, and a possible cap dollar amount on the individual projects. So I would be supportive of a cap, mainly because I think if we start building, I would see as a project that is probably a higher dollar value would be a playground, a whole playground in a schoolyard. And I'm conscious of the comments that Councillor Lewis made about not necessarily being here to fill the gap left by school boards. And I think if one school district or school committee sees success at one school building a playground, we may start to see just all of these ideas coming forward being, let's build a new playground in the schoolyard. So I'm wondering if there's any comment from staff about this motion that the councillors are making.
We will return with a report. We're going to have to do it fairly quickly because we need to actually start working on engaging neighborhoods around this initiative, so we're ready for the fall. So Ms. Smith won't like this, but we're going to be turning this around fairly quickly. I'll just note that when we started the program, and we'll write this in our report, when we started the program, the intention was to try and build from a kind of participatory budgeting perspective and to support as big or small ideas as possible within the funding available, hence the $50,000 per area. We absolutely hear the concerns. We'll do as we're asked to come back with the notion of an ineligible location, back-to-back years, look at the boundaries, and provide you some analysis on the caps of the funding.
Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if Councillor Sally might see this as friendly. If we get a quick report back on the ineligible funding in consecutive years and a recommendation on a cap, and I might even suggest that rather than 17, I might suggest that 50% might be the cutoff and call it 25,000. And that we ask for a report back on the boundaries at a later date, just so that staff can actually get this program ready to go under the current boundaries this year, considering the possibility of us adjusting the cap and the ineligible locations. and then conduct a boundary review after year 3. Because I think if we start splitting up the boundaries now, we're adding a lot of work to staff in a very short time. And I wonder if, first of all, if Councillor Sally might see that as a workable change to his second part, and what staff comment on that might be.
So before Councillor Sally responds, I'll look to staff.
Madam Chair, one of the issues from our original report, depending on how deep you want to go on a change in the boundaries, there will be staffing implications for us in terms of being able to support the level of work and engagement in each of those areas. So if council wishes to have the all 3 looked at in the report back, we will do that. If there's a desire to split it out, then you might wish to direct the boundary discussion to the multi-year budget, because there may be staffing implications that would need to be considered in that process.
So this is a report back, and the decision would be later anyway. And so when the report back comes back, then we could, at that time, refer the boundary discussion to the multi-year budget. Councillor Salih?
I don't want to keep going on forever, but I think I'll just leave it there if you guys want to separate that piece. And I think if staff can do it, bring that part, great. If they can't, we'll understand at that point not to slow the program. But I really feel that the geography part is really the representation part. When we look at voting in general, when we know that if people aren't represented in a certain area, and if you have the geography a certain way, then we know other neighborhoods don't get the proper representation. It's always comes back to the geography when it comes to dollars and support for communities.
So Ms. Livingston has said the report back will be the report back. It doesn't, and then we'll make a decision when we get the report back. So we don't have to change this motion at all. So the motion is Councillor Lewis's original motion that he sent to the clerk about the making locations ineligible for funding in consecutive years. So that is A. B will be splitting up geographic boundaries further, and C is putting a cap on the amounts given to each project. And this is all what staff will be reporting back on. Councillor Lewis?
I just wonder if we can call those separately.
Any further comments or questions? Concerns? So Councillor Lewis is requesting that we call A, B, and C separately. We will have the motion up on the screen in just a few seconds. And we're going to open the vote now.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
And we'll put B on the floor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
And I'll call the vote on Part C.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Something for everyone in that. Okay, we will move on to items for direction. Pardon me, Councillor Sally? And we will, thank you. We will need a motion to receive the report moved by Councillor Sally, seconded by Councillor Lewis, and I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So items for direction, 4.1 is the third and fourth reports of Accessibility Advisory Committee, and also the fifth report is in the added agenda. So we have 3 reports from ACAC, and I'm looking for a motion to receive. Moved by Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Sally. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
4.2 is the second report of the Child Care Advisory Committee. I'll look for a motion to receive that. Moved by Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Sally. Councillor Pelosa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just as per page 523, review a question for staff looking at their work plan. If any clarification could be given to the adopted counselor idea and the invitation for the mayor or chair of this committee to be invited at any time, if why isn't anyone of this committee?
Ms. Livingston?
Sorry, I was distracted for one moment. Was this the Child Care Advisory Committee? Yes, so this is this is not a staff initiative, of course, this is the Advisory Committee initiative, but I believe this is something this group has done every term. They want people to understand the childcare system well, some of the issues that are being faced, so they, as I understand it, divide themselves up and come and visit you, so if you wish to be visited, and just try to make sure that you understand the system and the issues that are being faced. In the past, it's not been such a big deal, but perhaps these days, as the environment is changing, it might be a bigger deal.
So it's basically just an outreach where they come and meet with us, just like a lot of groups. And okay. So I have a mover and a seconder for that, and no other questions. We can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, and we've dealt with item 4.3, so we have item 4.4, with it, which is a submission from Councillor Pelosa regarding garbage collection in city parks. Take it away, Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this motion came forward by residents reaching out and realizing it was a high volume concern coming from residents that with the city not having year-round garbage pickup in the parks due to budgetary constraints, people were finding that garbage just left strewn over their parks, damaging their civic pride, that frequently they were finding garbage piled where the garbage can normally would be, and looking to see those who have pets, that the pet waste is either left where it was naturally deposited or picked up and somehow strewn upon our trees, and it lands where it lands. Sometimes those bags aren't quite as heavy as you anticipated. So looking to staff to comment on what the chances are of getting year-round garbage pickup in parks, what our budgetary constraints might have to be if we're almost all the way there. If it was even most parks, they'd either have a trail connection, if there was an opportunity to even put those garbage pails not buried within the parks by the playground, maybe closer to the road to help facilitate staff easily getting to them, for some staff comments on that.
Mr. Stafford.
Through the chair, certainly park garbage collection in the winter has been problematic through the years. It is something that we've tried to adapt gradually. In the summer months, our park staffing is comprised mostly of summer employment, mostly students, the workers that work in the arenas and workers that work in the winter road operations. So when they come over at the end of the season, we have a very limited park staff that can handle and remove the park garbage that was there before. We take a look and an approach at some of the busier parks and some of the busier connections, and we receive complaints and concerns from residents, as you have, as to couldn't we put it here? This park is getting busier now because of a trail connection or because people are using it more often. And some of the challenges we face certainly are the fact that a lot of the cans that we place out there in the winter, they get used not for park litter and not for park residents, not for park participants, but by nearby residents that decide that they've missed garbage day for curbside collection, or they've had a party at their house, or they needed to get rid of that couch. And quite often the pictures that we receive of saying the overflowing garbage cans are that of household garbage. They're not of a litter from a person that's walking through the park and wanted to deposit their granola bar wrapper or their drink container or whatever they may have been using. So it's really hard for us to anticipate when they're full, why they're full, and how they're going to be full. So that is part of the challenge, along, as you say, in the winter months, trying to get to cans in the middle of the parks is not feasible at all. So we have to figure out a different location along a roadside or near the entrance to the park. And that's reasonable. You wouldn't have, I was at a Capulet Park the other day. There's 4 cans there currently. 1 can in the winter might be the right place to have something. So we're looking at other ways to do it. There's things like garbage sensors that you put sensors in the cans so that we get a report to the supervisor's office saying, you know, there's 10 cans full or there's 10 cans not, and so you're not out on a wild goose chase trying to get cans that really don't need to be collected at that time, and ones that, for whatever reason, got full sooner than normal. We can get to those. So there's lots of different technologies we're looking at. There's different ways to do some of the pickup. We're working with our current sanitation division to see if there's some opportunity there to share some resources. So willing to report back and figure out, you know, not just simply, it's not as simple as saying we've got 3,000 cans in the summer and 300 in the winter and it's 10 times the cost. It's not as simple as that. I don't believe it's that type of an impact, but it's looking along similar to what we do with the plowing of the pathways in the winter, which ones make sense. It might not make sense to go to all near 475 parks that we have, but it might make sense to increase some of the locations that we do have. And so we can report back on some of our recommendations that way and some of the ideas we have and what we think a cost would be to implement some of those. So I think that's a reasonable request and we can do that.
Councillor Lewis, and then Squire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I always appreciate being recognized before Councillor Squire. I appreciate staff's comment on being able to look into this and report back, and I would agree that we don't obviously need as many as we do in the summer months, and the locations would change. I certainly hear it from my constituents too, that particularly in Kiwanis Park, a lot of dog walkers year round, and we do have a trail system there, and we've in fact enhanced the trail system with the bridge over the CN rail corridor, so there's even wider use happening than has been in the past. So I would like to see us at least have an idea of what this might cost and how it might look. So I just want to thank Councillor Pelosi for bringing this forward, and I would be more than happy to second a motion on requesting staff to do this for us.
Councillor Squire.
So this is a subject I spoke on once before, and after I did that, my wife said, "Don't you dare ever speak on this subject again," because I got in so much trouble. But I just want to give a shout out for plogging, which many of you don't know what plogging is. Plogging is when you go out for a run and you take a garbage bag with you and you pick up litter as you're running. And I do it whenever I go running, and I run a lot. And I go through parks, and I can tell you that I see all kinds of litter all over the park within a very short distance of a garbage can. Particularly, I see a lot of Tim Hortons cups because there's a Tim Hortons near the North London Fields. I see them strewn throughout the park during the summer, during the winter, at all times. Some of the garbage obviously has blown in over the winter. So I think, I'd just like to give a shout out for people to assume individual responsibility and say, look, I'm not going to drop this stuff on the ground. I'm going to walk 100 yards to a garbage can. And I've also witnessed time and time again, people putting their kitchen garbage in a city container. When I was out canvassing, running for office, I saw a very nice gentleman, well-dressed, pull up in his car, go to his trunk, and take all of his house garbage out of the trunk of his car and put it in the park garbage can. Very convenient for him, but not so great for us. So I'm fine with the motion, but I just want to say that intuitively, people think if we put out more garbage cans, parks are going to be cleaner. I don't necessarily think that's the case, because I run through an area that has garbage cans and it has got tons of litter, which a lot of us on our own pick up and put in a garbage bag and take back to our home. So I think Mr. Stafford makes some really good points, and I just wanted to reinforce what he was saying and give a shout out for plogging. It's a great thing to do for the environment.
Thank you, Councillor, and I think last time you spoke about dog refuse, was that it? Don't even. So Yolanda will be very proud of you. Any other comments from committee? Nope. So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded, and we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So that brings us up to 4.5, but I believe that there may be some benefit to going in camera before we deal with 4.5. So before we do any of that, I'm suggesting to committee that we deal with item 4.6, which is a request for delegation status at a future meeting, at the June meeting. So if I could have a motion moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Sally, to allow delegation status for M. Willis at the June meeting of Community and Protective Services Committee. And I will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, so before we deal with item 4.5, we may benefit from some, the confidential item, hearing that first, which is solicitor-client privilege advice, a matter pertaining to advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and giving directions or instructions to the solicitors, officers, or employees of the municipality in connection with such advice relating to proposed amendments to the public nuisance bylaw. Can I have a mover to go in camera? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier, and we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I believe we're heading to committee room 3. We'll be back shortly for all those people in the gallery. So we are back in public session, and we'll move to item 4.5 on the agenda, which is unsanctioned and unsafe street parties, policy amendments, public nuisance bylaw, cost recovery. Any questions from committee or from visiting members of council? Comments? Councillor Lewis, I believe you had something?
I do, Madam Chair. I just have a motion to bring forward. I believe the clerk has the wording for that, that could be put up for members and the public.
So when the clerk is ready, I'll have her read the motion.
That the civic administration be directed to prepare a further revised draft amending bylaw to the public nuisance bylaw regarding nuisance party cost recovery and fees, and report back to the Community and Protective Services Committee meeting to be held on August 13th, 2019.
Councillor Lewis, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Did we need to have the section that we're requesting amended referred to in there?
Mr. Katolik? Do you want to respond to that? Do you need more specifics in that direction?
No, that's very clear.
Is there a second? Councillor Pelosa? Do you have any comment? You're just seconding. Okay. Mr. Katolik, if you could maybe give some commentary on what the process will be now. You're going to go away, come back in August. What's going to happen between now and then?
Sure. The bylaw that was before you at the PPM, there was direction to take the comments back from the PPM, which we did. We then put out a second draft bylaw on April 15th. So we listened to the comments of the PPM. We put that out again for public review, and we received some comments back from the LPMA, which are included in the report. This direction would provide us some time to make some further revisions to the draft bylaw, and I want to focus that this is only on the cost recovery. The bylaw has been enforced for many years. It's operational, it's working. The focus of the amendment is on cost recovery. We would come back with that amendment in the August meeting and hopefully be ready for any unsanctioned parties that would be planned for the fall of this year.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. Any comments, questions? Not seeing any. We have a motion. It's been moved and seconded, and I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So on the added agenda, we have the deferred matters and additional business. 5.1 is the deferred matters list. Can I get a motion to receive that? Or does Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any comments? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to offer comments on item number 1 on the deferred matters list, the request for the naming of Vimy Ridge Park. I want to thank the staff from Parks and Recreation, particularly Mr. McPherson and Mr. McGonigal, who came out to Ward 2 and took the time to listen to a great deal of input from stakeholders from various communities within the community on this issue. I know that they're going to report back to us later this year. But I just wanted to acknowledge the fine work that they did, bringing together a very diverse community of veterans and neighborhood associations and others who are very interested in this topic. So just wanted to thank them for that work.
Thank you, Councillor. Before we move forward, we forgot to report out, so I'll look to my Vice Chair to report out on the confidential matter that was on the public agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to report out that progress was made on the item that was discussed in camera.
Thank you, Councillor. Final item is, we have to vote to receive the deferred matters list. We have a mover and a seconder, so I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
A final item on the agenda is 5.2, which is a submission from Councillor Lewis. Go ahead, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to bring to my colleagues' attention, and I want to preface this by saying I really appreciate the fine work that our staff are doing. I know that Ms. Smith is here. The Neighbor Good program that supports communities in many ways. I know that certainly the Argyle Community Association is in the midst of organizing their Movie in the Park night for June 15th, and we'll be showing Spider-Man Homecoming. So if any of you haven't seen it or want to see it again before Far From Home, please come out to Kiwanis Park and join us. But the purpose of putting this item on the agenda is that we do have the lending equipment that goes out, and we've got the giant chessboard and the giant Jenga game and things like that really add to community events. However, there's been some back and forth, and I know that the last council discussed this as well, about who should be able to use this equipment and where it could be lent out. And I certainly want to see it continue to be accessible to the public at large. I know that we don't have really a budget for this, and that staff are doing their best to accommodate as things come up. But a lot of the time during the school calendar year, we're all busy folks, and that equipment may not always be in use. So I think that there's a real benefit to giving some consideration to asking staff to report back on how we might extend the use of this equipment to our home and school associations, which are not actually, while they're affiliated with their home schools, they're not mandated bodies of the Thames Valley District School Board or the London Catholic District School Board. They function in very many ways the same as community associations do, which are affiliated with the Urban League. There's an umbrella agency. The Urban League does some things with the City of London. The school board does some things with the City of London. But the little neighborhood groups are not necessarily benefiting from those things on the whole. So, and they build a sense of community and neighborhood. Before I had this role and before I was parenting, I was invited to school functions all the time, and they're great. And the people, the parents involved in those associations give a lot of their volunteer time to making the neighborhood, not just the school community, but the entire neighborhood feel connected. So I'd like to put forward a motion that the staff be requested to consider and report back before the beginning of the 2019-2020 school year on the viability of extending the definition of eligible groups in the current equipment lending policy, which is defined as groups of neighbors working to build community in their neighborhood. This could be a community association or an informal group of neighbors, to include home and school associations to allow for those bodies to be eligible for equipment lending during the school calendar year. And that's the text of the motion, and I think the important piece is during the school calendar year, because I don't think we want home and school associations asking for stuff in the middle of July when we're in the peak of community season, but I think during the school year, there might be an ability to accommodate them.
Staff want to comment?
Madam Chair, we're happy to return a report. It will probably be by the August CAPS meeting that we'll come back with a report on that and the potential impacts from a staffing and resource otherwise for the report.
Councillor Pelosa?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to staff. Thank you to Councillor Lewis for bringing this forward. Certainly, our school has a PTA and a home and school association for those not involved in the schools. The home and school associations get to fundraise differently for bigger projects, and the money belongs to the home and school association. It's not part of the school board and can't be taken at the end of the school year if there's any surplus. So that's the benefit to a home and school association. Certainly recognizing, as we discussed earlier, a lot of our schools are trying to find ways to do bigger projects, and they're the bigger schoolyard projects, the beautification, the outdoor learning areas that would benefit the whole community. If we could look into doing this, I think it would help them with some other options that they have to doing things in their local neighborhoods that certainly bring in the local neighborhoods, those local families who have a history in that area. And part of, in your report, I'd also be interested in knowing what percentage of the time is our supplies with Neighbor Good currently being used or utilized. It's a great service that a lot of people don't know about. If that just comes back in August too, that'd be great just to know what percentage it's being used.
We're happy to include that information. We did last November. We're happy to do it again.
So committee, I'm going to ask staff a question because this came up last term of council. Councillor Ridley requested that this service be extended to faith groups. And there's a very specific reason why school and church groups were not included in this. And I remember staff saying exactly what you said, Councillor Pelosi, that these groups are already very organized and already have access to, through their networking and organizational skills, equipment that maybe grassroots small neighborhood associations do not have the same kind of access to, which is, I believe, but I'll allow Ms. Livingston to explain it again.
Certainly, and we'll include this in our report when we report back. This small initiative generated out of the Strengthening Neighborhood Strategy, where residents were asking for an ability to have this kind of equipment available to them to hold small neighborhood events throughout the summer months. That's when we operate it. I can assure you that it is utilized a lot during the summer period. We do this on the side of our desk. There is no budget for this program. However, we will return with what we've been asked to do in terms of what it would take to do it and what the implications are for it. One of the reasons is that these unorganized groups don't have an ability to buy the equipment themselves, raise money to buy the equipment. So this was to try and provide access to resources they couldn't find readily. And there are other organizations now in the city that are providing this kind of equipment lending, like through our family centers, where home and school associations and others can access it. But we'll include all of that information in the report so that council has everything and can make a decision.
Thank you. And I just want to caution committee as well, it's some of these smaller initiatives like this and also the neighborhood decision-making thing were initiatives that were ongoing in a different way. As Ms. Livingston said, this was happening side of desk, no budget, no formal program, and it was more formalized. And I fear if we add more and more and more onto these programs, we're in danger of losing them altogether. They were good to haves that staff were doing without any sort of formal arrangement in place. So that's just my only caution. Also, many neighborhood associations are not affiliated with the Urban League. There is a cost to that, and that just goes to add to the rationale for providing supports to these smaller neighborhood associations, because they don't have the funds to even necessarily join the Urban League, but because it's not necessarily cheap. So we do have a mover for this report and a seconder, and Councillor Sully. And we will vote on this. I personally am not going to support this request for report. Just saying. Councillor Lewis.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up on a comment that you offered there as the mover of this. I think one of the things I struggle with is that we are actually, with this program, there are some inconsistencies. You point out the neighborhood associations that aren't affiliated with the Urban League, and yet we have neighborhood associations that are affiliated with the Urban League that are eligible to use this equipment too. So it's not that, I don't think that those, I agree, some of those small grassroots neighborhood associations don't have the ability to rent or to purchase and store. The same is actually true, I would say, of some of our home and school associations, which operate out of the back of somebody's car because they don't have a room at the school to store things. We've got many schools that are actually operating with students overflowing in portables, so those are challenges too. So I think just looking at an opportunity here, and I certainly hear what you're saying, I wouldn't want to lose this program. And I hope that when the staff report back, hearing that there's no budget, that maybe there's a request for budget consideration as well in the future, because I think this really adds some value to our neighborhoods at large. And I think the staff are doing a wonderful job, really on a shoestring situation. And I'd just like to bring some consistency to the situation.
With that, we will vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
And I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Counselor Lewis, seconded by Counselor Pelosa. We can vote by hand. All in favor? That carries 5 to 10.